So good morning, everyone. My one of my favorite writers, although she's not a practicing Buddhist, she sure does talk a lot about the Dharma, perhaps without knowing it, is Anne Lamott. Some of you may know her work. She's just terrific. But anyway, one of my favorite quotes from her we'll talk about this morning is, Expectations are resentments under construction. Expectations are resentments under construction. And I love the quote and want to talk about it today from the perspective of the Dharma. As we talk about here regularly, that one of the central teachings in Buddhism is the understanding of suffering and its causes. Gets encapsulated in the Four Noble Truths, which we talk about all the time, which illuminate how attachment and clinging to desires or outcomes often lead to pain and dissatisfaction. In her quote, expectations or resentments under construction, resonates really deeply with this wisdom from the Buddha, because her quote highlights the subtle ways in which our mental projections and our attachments pave the way for suffering. Expectations, when left unchecked, when allowed to just run on, become seeds of disappointment, frustration, and resentment. And I hope to make the case for that this morning. And when that happens, they lead us away from the peace and equanimity that is at the heart of our practice. So think about expectations, because at their core, they are simply mental constructs. They are projections of how we believe the world, other people, or even events should unfold. And they are often born from our own individual desires, preferences, and our past experiences. I want life to be this way. For example, we might want a friend to behave in a certain way. Might want our job or our retirement to go a certain way. We want life to follow a predictable trajectory. And certainly expectations can provide some direction and purpose, but they also carry an inherent fragility. This is because they are based on assumptions rather than the reality of impermanence. They are based on assumptions rather than the reality of unpredictability. And in a world characterized by impermanence, it's everywhere. When we cling to fixed outcomes, which is really the nature of expectations, it's like trying to hold water in a closed fist. It slips through and it leaves us with a sense of disappointment, with loss or failure. Because when reality does not align with our expectations, we experience this dissonance, like, why is this happening? That can quickly transform into resentment. And this resentment arises because we feel wrong, because we feel let down, we feel like the world is not aligning with our wishes. And by a person, circumstance, or even life itself, we feel that we've been wrong. So in essence, our expectations create a framework for potential suffering, laying the foundation for disappointment and emotional distress. You remember that the Buddha taught that craving and attachment are the root causes of suffering. And think about this. Expectations are a subtle form of attachment because they reflect that a clinging to specific outcomes or behaviors. What are expectations if not clinging to specific outcomes? When we expect something to occur in a particular way or things to go our way, we are, in a sense, binding ourselves to that imagined reality. Emphasis on imagined. This binding blinds us to the fluid and ever-changing nature of life, of our very existence. Think about someone who expects their partner to always understand their needs without explicit communication. And this is a very common pattern most of us encounter in our close relationships. In fact, it's probably the most common area, that being relationships, where this quote applies. When this expectation is not met, as it inevitably will not be met at times, we feel resentment toward our partner. The resentment, though, is not caused by their actions or inactions, but by an unrealistic expectation itself. I think you should behave this way. I didn't tell you that. I didn't ask for that. You don't. And my expectation is not met. I'm disappointed and I'm upset. Excuse me. So the Buddha would encourage us to look inward and to examine the source of our dissatisfaction, recognizing that our dissatisfaction stems from our attachment to how we think things should be. Now, this doesn't mean we deny the importance of setting intentions or making plans, of having expectations, but it is a reminder to hold them lightly. Hold them lightly with an awareness of impermanence and an awareness of the interconnected nature of all things. Because when we do this, when we hold them lightly, we engage with life more skillfully and we reduce the likelihood of this self-created suffering that comes from clinging too tightly to our expectations. The antidote to the suffering caused by expectations is acceptance, our old friend acceptance, which here again does not mean passivity, it does not mean resignation, nor does it mean we have to like what we're being asked to accept. Rather, it is the practice of seeing things as they are without layering our desires, our expectations, or our projections onto the reality of the moment. And of course, as we always talk about, in Buddhist practice, doing this is cultivated through mindfulness and our meditation practice. Because by observing our thoughts and feelings with our mindfulness, with our meditation, without judgment, we begin to notice how often our expectations arise. Just this week, as you said, or even this morning, as you said, just watch how often expectations arise. Oh, I wish I could have this for lunch. Oh, I wish this would happen. I wish so-and-so would do this. I wish, blah, 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 on and on. I mean, it is constant sometimes. And the tighter we cling to them, the greater we're going to suffer. So we also want to look at how these expectations shape our perceptions and shape our reactivity. How do we respond when our expectations are not met? When we've clung tightly to them? When we release the grip of our expectations, when we hold them more lightly, we open ourselves to the present moment. We allow life to unfold naturally as it's going to do anyway. We stop trying to control everything. Now, this does not mean that we'll never feel frustration or disappointment. Of course we will. I mean, it's part of the human experience. But it does mean that we're less likely to become trapped in cycles of resentment, in repetitive, ongoing resentment, because we're constantly disappointed. Instead of rigidly clinging to how we think things should be, we develop the flexibility to adapt to how things actually are. And here we bring into the equation our good old friend equanimity, which the Buddha emphasized, the state of being balanced and unshaken by the ups and downs of life. Cultivating equanimity, working from that stance, helps us navigate the gap between our expectations and the reality as it unfolds. So we've got our expectations, here's reality. Equanimity helps us navigate that gap with grace and composure. When we approach life with equanimity, we're less likely to fall into the trap of resentment. We are flexible. Instead, we understand that all things are subject to change and that most situations, not all, but most situations are beyond our control. The other thing I love about equanimity is it fosters compassion and understanding, because when we recognize that others also are navigating their own expectations, navigating their own challenges, we approach them with greater patience and empathy. Again, the beauty of Sangha is we can talk about some of this stuff. We can see where we get hooked. This reduces the likelihood of conflicts with others, which are often, not always, but often fueled by unmet expectations, by how others disappoint us. And when we can reduce the likelihood of that kind of conflict, we create space for deeper connections with others. I'm not always resenting you because you're not, marching to my drum. The problem is resentment is a heavy burden to carry. it's a form of suffering. It clouds our minds, it hardens our heart, it distances from the peace and joy that are our natural state that the Buddha promised us. And from a Buddhist perspective, resentment is a form of suffering that arises from our inability to let go of our expectations. By acknowledging and releasing our expectations, or at least holding them more lightly, even if we can't release them completely, we begin to dismantle the foundations of resentment that before it takes hold, before it sets the concrete sets. This process requires both mindfulness and compassion. Mindful self-awareness is the way we become aware of our expectations, how frequent they are, how common they are, and the ways they contribute to our dissatisfaction, even moment to moment. We then employ compassion to be gentle with ourselves when they arise, when we struggle with them. And to be gentle with others as we navigate the complexity of human relationships and our expectations for each other. Because together, the mindfulness and the compassion empower us to let go of those mental constructs that no longer serve us. They free us up to live with greater ease and openness. So expectations or resentments under construction serves as a profound reminder of the importance of cultivating awareness, acceptance, and equanimity in our lives. By recognizing the impermanent and interconnected nature of all things, we can release our attachment to fixed outcomes, and embrace the present moment as it is. In doing so, we dismantle the scaffolding of resentment before it can take shape, allowing us to move through the world with greater ease and greater freedom. As you know, the Buddha asks us to look deeply within ourselves, to question our assumptions, to question our attachments, to question our expectations that give rise to suffering, not just get on autopilot where we just go with them. When we let go of expectations, we're not abandoning hope, we're not abandoning our aspirations, but we are aligning ourselves with the natural flow of life as it unfolds. And this is the way we create conditions for true contentment. We're not always fighting with unmet expectations. This is a contentment that's not a fleeting happiness based on external circumstances, whatever new toy I just bought, but a lasting inner peace that arises from our ability to meet life as it is with both wisdom and compassion. So that is some thoughts on Anne Lamott's quote of expectations are resentments under construction.